Hello, my name is John Domingue. I'm a professor in the Knowledge Media Institute in the STEM faculty at the Open University, and I'm joined here by Michelle Pride.
Hi, I'm Michelle Pride. I'm the Associate Dean for Teaching Excellence in the Faculty of Wellbeing, Education and Language Studies. I have been a student in STEM, and I'm currently working with John on generative AI at the Open University.
So welcome to this Ask the Experts session, where we're going to cover some elements of generative AI. I will give a quick overview of what the technology is and talk a little bit about the potential impact on higher education and the Open University, showing you some demos. And Michelle will talk about some of the policy work that's ongoing. So let me get into it. So first I should acknowledge I'm up front here giving this presentation, but it's based on a lot of work through the Open University's Test and Learn program, and it's a collaboration between KMI, IET, and various schools that produce courses and do teaching, so computing, psychology, languages, the School of Law, and also some support services, the Learner Design Services, LXT, and Infosys. So first, the basics of ChatGPT, which has caught the public attention in a big way. So generative AI models like ChatGPT are predictors. They predict following an input. So for the text versions, you put in a bit of text and it predicts the next word. So here I have part of a sentence. The best thing about AI is its ability to, and there are 5 predictions here with a different probability expressed as a percentage. So the most likely next word from this generative AI is learn. And then that's followed by predict, make, understand, and do. So all a generative AI like ChatGPT, all it's doing is predicting the next word. It does this over and over again. So here I have a snippet of code at the top saying, take this input, this fragment of a sentence, and then predict the next 7 words. And then it first says, okay, the next word is learn, then from, then experience, then there's some punctuation, then it's, and it's not. So it keeps going around this loop, and then when you get the stream of words, or even if you get a picture, it's predicting one element at a time. So ChatGPT is based on a model called GPT-3. Here's some text generated by the predecessor, which is a bit simpler and a bit smaller with no randomness. And what I mean here is when it's writing this paragraph, it's always selecting the most likely word. So, and if you read it, I'll read it out loud. The best thing about AI is its ability to learn from experience. It's not just a matter of learning from experience, it's learning from the world around you. The AI is a very good example of this. It's a very good example of how to use AI to improve your life. It's a very good example of how to use AI to improve your life. The AI is a very good example of how to use AI to improve your life. It's a very good example. So it's not so good. And it turns out that choosing the most likely word gets you a sort of flat, very mundane type of descriptions. So what these generative AI systems do, and the way people use them, is you introduce this element of randomness, which is usually expressed as a temperature setting. And so then you're, instead of choosing the most frequent next word, you choose something that's less likely, is somehow the 3rd or the 4th most frequently best word, and then you keep doing that. And you see that this reads a bit better. I'll just read it out quickly. The best thing about AI is its ability to see through and make sense of the world around us rather than panicking and ignoring. This is known as AI doing its job or AI run-of-the-mill. indeed taking an infinite number of steps, developing a machine that can be integrated with other systems, or controlling one system that's truly a machine is one of the most fundamental processes of AI. Aside from the human-machine interaction, AI is also a big part of creativity. So you see that that's quite improved. Now, if I move to the to GPT-3, which is a bigger model, I'll explain what bigger means here. And then there's another piece of text which I think is better, but it's still a bit flat. The best thing about AI is its ability to automate processes and make decisions quickly and accurately. AI can be used to automate mundane tasks, such as data entry, and can also be used to make complex decisions, such as predicting customer behavior or analyzing large data sets. AI can also be used to improve customer service, as it can quickly and accurately respond to customer inquiries. AI can also be used to improve the accuracy of medical diagnoses and to automate the process of drug discovery. So I would say it's a little bit boring, but not bad. And again, if I introduce an element of randomness, don't always choose the most frequent word. I think that this is the best that we have. If I just read it out quickly, the best thing about AI is its ability to learn and develop over time, allowing it to continually improve its performance and be more efficient at tasks. AI can also be used to automate mundane tasks, allowing humans to focus on more important tasks. AI can also be used to make decisions and provide insights that would otherwise be impossible for humans to figure out. So a quick introduction of what how changing the parameters changes or improves the outputs. I want to peek a little bit into what's underneath this. So what's happening under the hood. So underneath, generative AI systems are neural networks. So they're biologically inspired, although any biologist would say they're very simple. They're nodes which are connected. And the nodes are arranged in layers. Some input comes up to the beginning, and then the input is propagated through the layers, and then an output comes out at the end. And these inputs and outputs are usually numbered. Neural networks are trained. So imagine I want to train a neural network to draw this graph that's on the right here. So I'm going to give an X coordinate and a Y coordinate will come out. So what do? So we train it by giving examples. And as you give examples, the strength of the connections between the nodes change, and that changes the output. And you can see along the bottom how the weights change and how the drawing after 10,000 examples is not so good. After 100,000 examples, you begin to see the glimpses of something. After 1 million, it's a bit better, but not perfect. After 10 million, it looks pretty good. And then you can see the neural network above, the strength of the weights has changed. The way training happens through the example is one key thing, and I think this is the most technical slide I'll show in my overview. Training is guided by something called a loss function. So the loss function is a mathematical description of what's the difference between the output that's being given and the output I would like. And then you can see at the bottom there are the lines being drawn, and there's a dashed line for the desired outcome, and the loss function describes the difference mathematically. And you can see at the beginning the loss, which is the y-axis, is quite large, and as we go along giving more examples using the loss function as a guide, the loss is minimal, and at some point we accept the result. So once it's trained, as I said earlier, inputs come in terms of numbers. They're propagated through the network according to the functions of each node and also the strength of the connections, and then an output is given. And the output has been trained to be the output we desire given a set input. So when you type a prompt in English to either a language generator like ChatGPT or a image generator like DALL-E 2 or Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, it's all numbers going in and numbers going out. The network size and the network shape matter it seems to be more of an art than a science. But if the number of nodes is too simple, you don't get good outputs, no matter how long you train for, and the shape matters. So having a number of middle layers between the input and output is important. ChatGPT is based on GPT-3. So it has 400 layers, like the layers I showed you. There are some millions of neurons. There are 175 billion connections between those different nodes, leading to 175 billion weights that have to be learned. It uses a special architecture which came out of Google called a transformer architecture, which just means that special attention is paid to some parts of the sequence. And in comparison, the human brain has a 1 million billion connections. So it's not as big as a human brain, but we're a few orders of magnitude smaller. And maybe in time there will be parity. So that was a lightning overview of some of the key elements of what generative AI systems like ChatGPT have. I'll spend the rest of my bit talking about education and what we're doing at the OU. So you can imagine there's a lot of excitement and maybe nervousness on having a system that can write as well as university students can, and what that might mean for assessment. Michelle will say more on that. Just a couple of examples I would give. The University of Michigan is rolling out generative AI. They have 3 services they announced in August. So they're giving, for the moment, all students access to ChatGPT at no cost. I'm not sure for how long they'll be able to maintain this. They're allowing students to use a version of GPT to query and question their own data sets, connecting to some existing services. Again, currently at 0 cost, but with usage limits. And then they have a third service, GPT Toolkit, which will allow students to construct, train, and host their own AI models securely. One thing that people do with generative AI, these generative AI systems are generic. So ChatGPT was trained on the entire web. So it sort of speaks in an average web voice. So what organizations tend to do is tune it to speak in the way that our organization works. So we're thinking of tuning this on OU content, for example. There are websites like There's an AI for that, which claim to have nearly 8,000 AIs for over 2,000 tasks related to nearly 5,000 jobs. And you can see I've typed in education teacher, and you can see that there are 1,300 AIs for 153 tasks. And if one has a look at these, here are the tasks related to education teacher, and you can see there's things related to building courses, doing school lesson plans, exam preparation. If I expand on online courses, you get a list of coaches and customized learning. So there's a lot of activity that these generative AI platforms, as well as being used as they are, people are using them as a starting point to build other exciting systems, and that includes us. So to wrap up my bit, I'm just going to show you a couple of things that we've been working on in the Knowledge Media Institute and also in the Test and Learn projects and also in the Innovation Foundry, which is an innovation initiative that the OU's recently started. So first I'll talk about a module writing assistant. So if you're a student at the OU, you consume our modules. We spend 2 years at least making each module. There's a team which may involve 30 people, so it's resource intensive. So we've been thinking, could generative AI support this? We've run a number of workshops with different faculty, with all of the faculties, with different schools in those. We've found 150 challenges associated with the technology and generated 140 ideas, just under 140. And those ideas are related to improving the learning experience, improving content creation, providing advice, supporting the student journey and other means. One other tool I'm going to show you in a moment is related to a long-running project in KMI called CORE. So CORE is a national service where we index, it's nearly 300 million research papers, where if you look at any research paper, you can find related research papers. And I'm explaining this to you because it's embedded into the demo. I'll show you in a moment. Also, another thing I'll say is when we create our modules, we have a framework at the OU for doing this, and it's based around supporting 7 main types of learning activities, from assessment to being assimilative, experiential, communicative, etc. And analysis of our materials, it looks like we intend to encourage students to spend a fair amount of time doing assessment and doing assimilative activities, maybe reading, and maybe generative AI could help change this balance. Okay, so I'm going to start this movie now, it's a little screencast movie. It's a proof of concept for a Gen AI based module writing assistant. So first thing I do is I select a module. So I'm selecting one in the School of Languages. Then our modules have a number of units. So I've selected a unit, and then I'm going to ask the Gen AI, could you write a conclusion for me? So it goes off and thinks for a while, looks at the material it has, and then it just starts writing the material. And then the idea is an academic would look at this, maybe take parts, maybe reject it altogether, or maybe it will be inspiration in another way. I can go back to the generative AI and say, okay, I don't quite like that. Could you add a concluding sentence? And then you get a concluding sentence at the end. So we've done some initial analysis of this, and if you're careful, then the writing is comparable to the writing of the academics in some cases. Other things we can do, which we haven't tested, but we've developed the software for. You can generate quizzes automatically. So you can say, okay, could you generate some quizzes? Then you generate, the system generates the quizzes and the answers. And again, the idea is that the academics can reject this, or they can use it, or it can be inspirational. Here's a link to Core GPT. So this acts as a state-of-the-art button. So imagine we want to refresh a course. We want to say, what's the state of the art in whatever area? I've asked about the semiotics here, which is related to the languages course. I'm asking about accent, and then you get a summary and then the 5 top related papers here. Then finally, for the writing assistant, the tool can automatically analyze the OU content and say, okay, these are the types of activities which are supported. And I can say, look, here's one activity which is communicative. I want to change this learning activity to be an assessment. And then the system will rewrite the material. So this is now an assessment rather than an assimilative or a communicative activity, which it was before. And we think this could make our materials quite dynamic, that any piece of content could be used in a variety of ways. So it could be dynamic either if we're repurposing a course, for example. Okay, so that's the AI module writing assistant. Now let me move on to the AI digital assistant. So this is a tool that we're looking at to support students directly. And again, I have a proof of concept and I'll just play through the movie. So here, again, I'm looking at a languages course and I've selected unit 1. I load the material into the system. And then the idea is that students could use this to generate quizzes or flashcards or talk. So I'm going to ask it to generate 6 quizzes for me, 6 quiz questions. And here they are. What is an accent? 3 main signs of systems. When do infants first begin to learn the sounds of language? So I put in my answers say when I'm not sure, and then ask for marks. And then the system says that some are correct, some are partially correct. And then for the ones that are not completely correct, the system will give suggested answers. And then the students could use this to test, obviously to test what they've learned, to see where there may be gaps. If students are preparing for a test, they can ask the system to generate some flashcards, or if they just want to learn for their own benefit, and you can save these to a PDF. So I generated 3 flashcards to help me test myself on this. And then finally, I can have a discussion. So I can say, okay, I want to just have a discussion with the system. The system says, okay, based on the materials, ask the question, I give an answer, and then it's the start of a dialogue. So where I can delve into depth into a part of a course I'm most interested in, or I feel unsure about. So I'm gonna move to the next bit. Okay, actually, I'm just gonna stop sharing for a second and reshare, because I realize I made a mistake when I was sharing. I need to put let's have a look. Yeah, I need to include computer sound. Sorry about this. And it's that one. Yeah. So one thing we've done is connected a generative AI tool like the one I showed you to another AI system. There are some AI systems coming out which act like human avatars. And what I'm hoping you'll hear now is I ask a question. The generative AI here has been trained on some psychology materials, methods and skills course, and it will give an answer. You'll see the answer come up as text, and then the AI avatar will speak the answer. Okay.
What is the difference between structured and unstructured interviews?
In a structured interview, all interviewers ask the same predetermined questions in the same order. This makes it easy to compare answers between different candidates. In an unstructured interview, the interviewer asks questions as they occur to them and follows up on the answers given. This allows for a more natural conversation, but makes it harder to compare answers.
Okay, so with this demo, what I'm outlining is we could, in principle, with this technology, turn any piece of our materials into an interactive session with an AI. So you can ask questions through speech and get responses to that. So that was not a fixed question, it was not a fixed response, but it could have been a question on any element that's covered in our materials. So we've been testing these types of tools, not always generative AI based, for a number of years. And a while ago, we did a survey of students, 155 students, and it looks like students are positive about the idea of using an avatar and having it in a VLE. So this gives us encouragement to carry on the work. To summarize my section, just to summarize what I said, generative AI is based on large neural networks, which have been trained over the entire web. They generate images or text through repeated predictions. Many predict that generative AI will be as disruptive as the internet has been, and I'm one of those. Higher education and distance education may be especially disrupted, and the range of OU personnel are, including Michelle and myself, investigating what benefits may emerge for both staff and students. So we do have for staff a community of practice, and there's a link in the slides if you want to join that. So now let me move over to Michelle.
Thanks very much, John. That's just fascinating. And even when I see it again and again, it still blows my mind about the potential use of generative AI in education, but also in our daily lives. And, you know, there's just so much potential. It's really exciting. what I'm going to talk about is what does it mean for us all as students, and as I say us all, I'm still a student, but what does it mean for our studies? As I mentioned, I am the Associate Dean Teaching Excellence in a different faculty, but I have been working with John and about 40 others who are experts either in generative AI, or they're experts in learning, teaching and assessment, or potentially they're experts in supporting students. And we've had students involved as well. And so we have about 40 of us who have been coming together and liaising with the different faculties to determine what it means for you in your studies. And I just want to point out, I don't know if you realize that in John's slides, a lot of the images that he used were generated through a generative AI tool, DALL-E 2. This image that you see on this slide, I used Bing powered DALL-E, or DALL-E powered Bing, I'm not sure which way around really, but Bing, and I prompt that I used was create a photo of a purple person using a purple laptop to create an image of a purple person using a purple laptop showing the image on the laptop. So quite meta there, but this is the image that it gave me. And I was the prompt author, and I created this image on the 19th of September 2023. And you might say, well, I don't really care about your prompt, Michelle, and I don't really care when you created it. But what I wanted to show you was responsible usage of generative AI. So I'm not just passing this off as my own, I'm actually correctly referencing it and telling you how I got it. And I haven't doctored it, I haven't done anything to it. Next slide, please, John. So the OU, I told you about the group of people that came together, and we wrote a position statement, and it is on the website, and there's a link in this slide, and we'll get that link out to you. And in our position statement, we made some things very clear. Now, I have put on the slides, and all of my slides, you'll see in the top right of the slide, it says, remember to fact check everything. Because those of you who've been playing with generative AI tools, and those of you who've been reading about it, will know that actually the information that it spits out at us, and I say spit because it comes so quickly, is not necessarily correct. So you do need to fact check everything. And I asked, someone asked me recently, if a student responsibly uses generative AI and submits something's wrong, do they get penalized? Well, yeah, of course you do, because you didn't fact check it. You've got to submit information and answers that are correct in your assessment. So there's that, remember to fact check there every single time. And then at the bottom, I've put fully acknowledge and reference the use of generative AI. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But just like I fully acknowledged the use of generative AI on the picture on my previous slide. So as an institution, of course, we're very aware that generative AI is evolving rapidly, particularly in higher education. It's one of the leading fields using generative AI. And as you saw from John's presentation, gosh, wow, it is evolving rapidly. And there are exciting opportunities. And not just for your academic skills, but your employability skills. Some of you may already be using generative AI in your work. Some of you may not, but will be applying for jobs that are asking for skills. And we get asked the question all the time, will generative AI take my job? And no, it won't, but people who can use generative AI tools might take your job. So it's really important that you do develop those employability skills, the digital skills for the future, and also life skills. I know that, someone gave me a great example yesterday, actually. They have a friend who always sends the most lovely messages and birthday cards. And this lady said to me, I just don't have the time or the skill to write these lovely messages. So she got generative AI to write her a really nice, sympathetic and supportive and lovely message for the card she was sending. So there's lots of things that you can use it for. And we do want to support you in using the technology responsibly and ethically. So I do have to point out, and it is in big bold letters here, if you submit work as your own that is not your own, doesn't matter whether you got your aunt, your uncle, your neighbor, or a computer to do that for you, you are in breach of the academic conduct policy. We have an academic conduct policy. I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. It already included artificial intelligence. That means generative AI as well. So you need to make sure that you use it responsibly. And we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. I've got at the bottom of this slide here a link, and again, we can share these links with you. So this first one is for taught students. Just to let you know, taught students are all undergraduate students, and most masters are taught master's programs. There are a few masters that are research programs, and that's where the postgraduate research students come in. So your research students, your PhD students, there's a slightly different way of looking at this for those students. So next slide, please, John. We've heard about some of the exciting things that are potentially available in the future, but right now, how could you use generative AI in your studies? Well, reminder at the top, fact check everything, and then at the bottom, fully acknowledge and reference the use of generative AI. I probably needed to go that way to show you that. So what you can do, you could use it, for example, through captioning and audio description, text-to-speech and speech-to-text and assistive technologies. Some of you might already be using Grammarly, so that helps with accessibility as well. To help improve writing skills, so we know heard from quite a few students about having generative AI tools help them with make their writing sound more academic, help them check their grammar, their spelling, their punctuation, and so forth. Maybe you want to use it, as John shows some of these potentials here, for revising your own knowledge on a topic. But remember, fact check everything. It can help support your critical thinking skills. So maybe you look at that output and you think, that is not right. I know that is not right. It's going to force you to think more critically. Or it might be that you have a conversation with a generative AI tool. You might ask, what is the correlation between poverty and happiness? Okay, that probably was a very social science type question. That's my background. But the point is, the machine might say, well, what do you mean by poverty? So then you have to think about, well, what actually is poverty, and so forth. And you can have that critical interaction with the machine. Or when it spits out the answer to you, you might think, I don't think I've got my prompt quite right, because I don't think that's quite right. So again, you're always critically thinking and analyzing. And it can help you develop understanding of complex concepts. Or maybe it's a new context and you want to apply your existing knowledge. So you can ask it to throw things together. If you want a bit of fun, you can just ask it to throw random things together, like, I don't know, a cat riding a bicycle. And of course, if you suffer from blank page syndrome, which I know many of us do, blank page, don't know where to start, you could get some ideas from generative AI. But remember, fully acknowledge and reference use of generative AI. Probably pointing in the wrong direction. Next slide, please, John. So what do we mean by responsible usage? Well, first of all, do not, and this is really important, enter any assignment questions or other material from your module directly into these tools, as it may constitute a breach of copyright. So first and foremost, I'll say that again, do not enter any assignment questions or other material from your module directly into these tools. That's really important. Critically evaluate any information provided by these tools. I've been saying that as we go along. Remember to fact check everything. You are responsible for ensuring that assessments are written in your own words. I can't stress that enough. If you're worried about plagiarism, ask yourself, have I used my own words? If you haven't used your own words, have you correctly attributed all sources? And I'm going to come back now to remember to fact check everything, because some of these tools will produce beautiful references for you. So we know that Professor John Domingue is an expert in generative AI. So it might spit something out and it might say resource, and it's Professor John Domingue. The date sounds right, the title sounds right, the journal sounds right, the length of the journal sounds right. All of these things sound right. But if you ask Professor John Domingue, he goes, I didn't write that. That's because it is a made up or an hallucinated reference. So if you are going to use generative AI, you must make sure that what it spits out is correct, and you must make sure that the references that come out are real. We've done some testing around this at the Open University, and we found that about 70% of the references that come out are made up. Not very clever. So, well, maybe it is clever, but that's not the point here. The point is that you have to correctly attribute your sources. Next slide, please, John. So, responsible usage slide 2, fully acknowledge any part of your work where generative AI or technology or assistive tools were used. And I'll come on to that in a minute. The next slide is going to show you some really good practice around how you can acknowledge it. The university, as I said, requires that all the work you submit is your own, and there's a reference at the library's website. There's a reference to how you reference it. We use Cite Them Right at the Open University, and Cite Them Right includes how to reference generative AI. And for postgraduate research students, please refer to your supervisors. And a final reminder around responsible usage is that over-reliance on generative AI actually takes you away from learning. So I think there's an existential question here around what is education, what is a university, what is a university degree? And at the end of the day, you know why you are studying with us. And I would hope that you want to come and study with us because you want to develop your academic skills. You want to improve your communication. You want to improve your critical thinking skills. When we've talked about, what are the digital skills of the future? Well, in addition to digital skills, because we know we have to bring that human element into anything that's produced by generative AI. So you've probably heard about prompt engineering, which can be a very highly paid role for people who have really good skills at it. But then again, it might just be a skill on a job that's not paid particularly well, but we'll have to use prompt engineering one way or another. But we also need to bring in that human element to figure out what the best prompts are. We need to bring in that human element to actually identify what the problems are. So I was reading an article that said it's not prompt engineering that's going to be the skill of the future, it's problem identification that's going to be the skill of the future. So you're going to have to learn those skills, and you're not going to learn that by relying on generative AI to complete your degree. So that's all about the responsible usage. Next slide, please, John. Best practice. So in the guidance that we're thinking about for students, we're saying that it's best practice to include a copy of the generative AI output as an appendix, and also to include this information. And so this is why I said up front, I was the author of the prompt for that picture. That was the date that I had that picture. A description of the use of AI. And in this example here, I used AI-assisted Bing to generate initial ideas. I then asked it to dispute my key points once I had formulated them. The following prompts were put into Bing. I list my prompts, or whether it's Bard or whether it's DALL-E 2, whatever it might be. The following output was generated, include that AI-generated output, and I took the following actions. So explain what you did with that information and how it ended up in your assessment, for example. I come back to the fact again, you have to fact check everything, and you have to fully acknowledge and reference the use of generative AI. Just can't keep stressing those points enough. Next slide, John. So what happens if you inappropriately use generative AI? Well, the university regulations on academic misconduct have not changed. You must submit your own work. And if you submit something that is not your own, you must reference it properly. So inappropriate use of generative AI, such as copying and pasting artificial intelligence generated answers without referencing them, is prohibited. And if it is suspected that a submitted assignment has content that is not your own, but is passed off as your own, you will be referred for an academic conduct investigation, and that can lead to penalties, it can lead to marks, and if it's repeated offence, it can lead to much more severe response. So if you take nothing away from today, please remember that you have to fact check everything when you use the tools, and you have to fully acknowledge and reference the use of generative AI. Next slide, please, John. This is a list of resources which I will ask someone magically, I'm sure, to put in the chat box so that we can have them available to you, or if not, we can share them with the delegates. I'm not the person behind the scenes doing all the magic, but we'll make sure we get these resources to you. But there's some good resources here that include the university's links, university academic conduct policy, how to avoid plagiarism, and those kinds of things. Final slide, please, John. So you probably can't really see behind me. If I move a little bit away, you might see that I've got a picture of an ice skater here. And for that particular picture, I put a prompt into create an image of an ice skater in purple with purple ice skates with brown hair in the style of Vincent van Gogh. So behind me, that was Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. And then you see on this final slide here, my two favorite things are ice skating and Coldplay, and I asked it to create an image of a skater in purple with purple skates in the style of Coldplay, and that's the image I got. So that's all from me, and thank you so much for listening. John, do you want to have a look at some of the questions that are coming into the chat box?
Okay, so okay, yeah, great question, but maybe I just try and take them in order. Can you see them too, Michelle? Yeah.
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay. So the first one, how did we generate these ideas? So the 140 ideas would, we had a 3-hour workshop where we took OU academics or production teams that support the creation of materials. We explained what generative AI was. We gave them time to play with it. And then there was a moderated session. So 4 of these 3.5 sessions, 3.5 hour sessions were run, and then we generated those and then we collated them. So I didn't have time, but they're really neat things like having an assistant every time you read something, and then you could ask the assistant for that. Having a personalized tuition, personalizing your learning journey, having a forum where you could practice talking to AIs and get feedback, or practice being a counselor. The next question, when will this be rolled out to students to use? It's hard to predict this. I think probably we might start experimenting in small phases next year. If things go well and we work out, maybe in 25 we'll start deploying it. But there's no, please don't hold me to that. So we have to make sure that we tune it. We have to think of EDI aspects. We have to think of hallucinations, and we have to test. So we're going to be building things and testing things. So it will be at least a couple of years before it's rolled out. Yeah, so the next question is, my experience of AI systems is that they happily make up if it doesn't know the answer. How do we deal with that? So there's a couple of ways you can deal with it. One is you tune it on OU materials, so it doesn't speak in an average web voice. The other is you put something called guardrails around it. So if there's a prompt or whatever it is, you first do a search, a semantic search of the OU materials, you get an answer. You then say to the generative AI, give an answer, but only use these resources in your answer. And then it gives an answer, and then you check the answer. You do some sort of matching between the answer and the materials to make sure there's something that isn't inconsistent. Do modern generative AI get bugs like older AI? Yeah, yes, I would say that's a great question. Do they get bugs? I mean, one thing maybe I should make clearer is that the team that built ChatGPT, OpenAI, don't fully understand why it's so good. So there's a general thing that this is really something that nobody fully understands, and we're playing with it and investigating it. So it's not that it's more than just it having bugs. We don't fully understand how it operates. There's another question. Does the OU plan to use any open source large language models? So for the audience, things like ChatGPT, there are free versions, but mostly you have to pay for a subscription. So if we did this for all the students, there's a cost to that. There are these free models, which are not quite as good, but they're getting better. And there are lots of people working on those. So we do plan to investigate open source models, because that would be a huge reduction in costs. And our dream is to give every student access to this in a variety of ways to support your learning, and to do that without increasing our fees at all. So yes, for sure, open source models are important.
John, there's a question all the way at the top. I'm not sure whether you saw it. It was, what is the effect of using different temperatures, degrees of randomness?
Okay, yeah, good question. So what happens is that, as I showed you at the beginning, if it's 0, you get something that's very flat and mundane and boring, and you get repetition. If you push the randomness too much, it just begins to steer off topic. So it's a sort of you think of it as injecting lots of creativity, or some people have said it's like drinking lots of coffee or alcohol. And there's a sort of sweet spot, and then after that, what you get isn't so good. And again, I'm not sure if this is fully understood, but this 0.8 or seems to be a good number.
John, I just want to talk a little bit about bias. We've got a question from John in the chat there around bias in generative AI, and his particular point was around a lot of the AI is generated from the US, and lots of material does have a US bias to it. And I think it's a really important point, because one thing to think about as a university, we've been working really hard to make our curriculum more inclusive, more representative of who our students are, and to what we call decolonize our curriculum. And the generative AI tools that are the more common commercially available ones generate their information from a wide range of information that is traditionally biased, that is maybe potentially white, Western, male, biased. So we do absolutely have to take into consideration the output from from these tools, and we as academics in writing the materials, we do need to be considerate if we're going to be using new technology to produce materials. And that's what John was talking about a little bit there with fine tuning. If we're using, OU materials, we can be thinking about that inclusivity, we can be thinking about that decolonization, because it is really important for us as an institution to make sure that our curriculum reflects who our students are. I don't know if you have anything to add about bias, John.
Yeah, so just, yes, as Michelle said, one of the main ways one addresses bias is to tune the generative AI on materials that are curated, that you think that have less bias in the open web. The other thing you can do is you can inject into the prompt. So every time you use these systems, there's a prompt, which is some sentences in English. And you can see in the demos I gave, the prompts weren't being entered directly. So you choose from a menu or you type in a text. And what happens is the tool behind the scenes adds to the prompt that you put in. And so what we envisage in, for example, in every prompt, we would add a context to say, please make sure in your answer, you take these factors into account, gender bias, racial bias, etc. And think about spreading that. So you do this sort of injection, and then, as I mentioned earlier, you can also do a check at the end. Say, okay, look at this answer I'm about to give. Is it, are these all white men? And then maybe I want to think about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, John, because we talked about developing critical thinking skills. So to get students to be looking at their output, challenging the output back into the generative AI tool, asking for it to come out, and it's that evolution of thought, isn't it? And that evolution of critical thinking. So that's really important. And I know we've got one other question, but I just wanted to bring something else into the mix, John, and that's around sustainability. So you can talk a little bit more about the technology behind it, but the general layperson interpretation is it takes a lot of power, it takes a lot of energy to actually have these tools function. That's the training of them and then the usage of them. So I don't know if you want to say anything, John. I mean, even core, we talked about core and having 300 million records. We need a lot of servers and we need a lot of cool space to store that information. So that there's definitely some environmental and sustainability issues to consider generally in regarding generative AI.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that needs to be taken into account. These tools, for the most part, are embedded in some data farm in the cloud and often run by a big company. And if you look, pretty much all the big tech companies have a sustainability plan. So I think Google claimed that they're carbon neutral in their operations. Microsoft want to be carbon negative in a few decades. Now, of course, one can investigate that and say, are they really true? But it's something that the whole area takes into account. Of course, we have to, and it's non-trivial, you have to compare costs. What's the cost, for example, of a student using a generative AI for some activity versus the human support for that? And what's the carbon footprint of a face-to-face meeting versus an online meeting, etc. So, and again, it's something that we think about at the OU.
Thanks, John. there's another question in the chat box, and then I've got one more here. So if we go to our chat box, apologies, everyone, we have our own chat box here. It says, I know you mentioned there's an AI for that, but is there another website for people who are interested in generative AI, kind of like Kaggle for statistics?
Good question. So the main place where I get my information is X, formerly known as Twitter. And I have my area is artificial intelligence, and I work with a lot of people internationally. So I have friends who advise UNESCO and the EU Council, and they say that they spend dedicated time every day on X to keep up to date. So that is where I would go for. And then of course for each one, you'll see lots of other websites and cool places. There are a range. There's also a range of blogs that people give, which you can get through Twitter, and then on YouTube. There's a lot on YouTube. There's also some courses which come out of Stanford, which are very good. There are free courses. So there's a lot of material. There's a lifetime of material out there, if one could keep one busy.
Already, exactly. So there's a couple of comments here. One of them, I mean, I realized we were just talking about references, and we were talking about sites and these things. And I think, again, it's just worth reiterating that it's really important to go to any reference and check it out. Don't just assume that the reference itself is correct. Just wanted to rephrase that point. John, there's another one here, which I was actually talking to my husband about, was apparently Apple may bring AI to Siri with the next launch. And we were talking about, at the moment, technologically, the speed isn't there for having an AI generated Siri yet, but the likelihood is coming. What do you think about that, John?
It's interesting. So it's funny, maybe I'll show you. So I would say Siri was already an AI-based platform, just based on a different AI. The speed argument is interesting. I think of course, one can always just get bigger and better machines, but there's a sustainability angle there. There are what we term heuristics one could apply. So, for example, if you can guess that lots of questions will be about certain topics, like where's the nearest shop for X or Y, you could what we call cache those, so you have pre-prepared answers. And then as you're running these systems, of course, what the company like Apple gets is you get all the questions and you get all the answers. So then you would have a dedicated AI trying to make more efficient the pairings between the questions and the answers. So moving resources around for that. So yeah, interesting thing. And of course, there's a lot of work on speeding these generative AI systems up. So for example, one piece of work is you get a big generative AI, a big neural network, and it trains a smaller neural network. So it acts like a mentor to a smaller neural network, and the smaller neural networks get something like, I don't know, 85% as good as the big one. So learning from a mentor, and then of course the smaller ones are going to be faster, because every time you do a query, if you're passing all those numbers through a big network, of course that's one of the things that slows you down.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. I was looking at a graph of the emergence of these tools and the parameters that these tools are using, so the complexity and the compute power, and absolutely we're seeing kind of an explosion, but also a shrinking in some areas as we realize what that tipping point is for accuracy and efficiency and so forth. As you talked about earlier, that 0.8 seems to be working quite well. So John, there are no more questions in the chat box. Is there anything that you would like to say, any thoughts that you have before we wrap up?
Yeah, so I went to do my PhD at the OU decades ago in the 80s on AI, actually building an AI tutor. So I've been in the AI field for many decades. And what I would say is I and my colleagues are used to saying to people who say, oh, this is going very fast. And we usually say, no, it's not going that fast. It's okay. But now we all think it's going very fast. So this is a very fast moving space that reminds me of the early days of the web, except we now have the web to spread things over. So it's sort of the web exponential. So what I would say, if you're interested in this topic, that things are going to change very quickly and it's going to be disruptive. And we don't know yet how it will be disruptive. So, when the web was first created, we didn't imagine Google or Facebook or social media or YouTube or Netflix, etc. So I think the next 2 to 5 years are going to be extremely exciting.
And John, you can maybe remind me, but there was someone very famous, because you've used this quote before, that said, technology is anything that didn't exist when you were born. So where does that come from? Maybe that's a nice way to wrap up.
Yeah, so there's Alan Kay, one of the heroes of mine, was an Apple fellow. And in fact, he was worked on Xerox PARC. So everything you see around, every time you see a window and move a mouse, or even local internet, it comes from Xerox PARC in the 70s. So he said that people used to complain about technology, and he said people tend to use the term technology to talk about anything that was invented after they were born. And you have to remember that things like a piano has 20,000 components and takes many years to learn, and it's a technology. So everything man-made is technology, including fire, the wheel, and writing. So they're just things that we use. There's an email that's been put in the chat, I should say, if you want a copy of the slides. The email is stem-news@open.ac.uk.
Great way to wrap up, John. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us.